energy crisis and the uncertainty brought by the war in Ukraine would indicate there is more economic pain to come. So to what extent has the Chancellor factored that in? Our economics editor Ben Chu is at the Newsnight wall. Ben.
Yes, Kirsty, just how bad are things going to get economically for households this year? The Office for Budget Responsibility's answer today was frightening. If you have one chart to sum it up, it's this one. It shows average UK household disposable income. Mainly thanks to the inflation hitting a peak of 8.7% later this year, average real-term incomes are now projected to fall by 2% in 2020-21. Now, perhaps that doesn't sound that much, but bear this context in mind. It's bigger than the drop in household incomes in the pandemic. It's bigger than the fall in the global financial crisis. It's bigger than anything we saw in the 1970s. It's the biggest on record. So what has the Chancellor done to help? Well, there is some assistance in the near term in the form of £9 billion of energy loans and today's fuel duty cuts and the national insurance threshold rise, plus some smaller measures. Those have cancelled out around a third of the damage that would otherwise have been visited on average incomes. Yet the big gap, analysts say, is nothing on universal credit benefits, which help the least well off. Look at this distributional impact of the new measures today, the fuel duty cut and the national insurance threshold rise. This shows the poorest households on the left and the richest on the right. And as you can see, most of the gains from the Chancellor's new policies in cash terms goes to those in the upper half of the income distribution. What else was missing? Well, there was no support for businesses facing crippling energy costs. There's no additional fiscal support for public services either, whether defence, education, health or policing, which are all now facing real terms cuts in their budgets this year. Some are calling this omission public sector austerity by stealth. Yet there's something of an oddity. We see a truly disastrous year for households, but the wider economic outlook looks largely unchanged, even rather benign over the next few years. State borrowing is now considerably lower than previously expected. Could that possibly be right? Well, it rests on a big assumption in the OBR's forecast that there is no longer term damage to the UK economy from this energy crisis. This yellow line shows last October's projected GDP path from the OBR, and the blue line shows the updated one. It's a little slower, but it ends up in the same place. Is this realistic? Well, we've had a lot of crises in recent years. The financial meltdown, Brexit, the pandemic. They've all left permanent economic scars, and some economists doubt that this time will be different. And the OBR itself says in its outlook that it doesn't incorporate the possibility the global economic spillover from the Ukraine invasion could be much worse. Fuel prices could easily stay higher for longer. In other words, take all these projections with a pinch of salt. The Chancellor may have to return with more economic support for households, businesses and public services later in the year. Finally, can Rishi Sunak now claim to be a tax-cutting Chancellor with today's increase in the national insurance threshold and the surprise cut from 2024 in the basic rate of income tax from 20p to 19p? It can be confusing when you consider that he's also simultaneously pushing ahead with the national insurance rate increase. Drill down into the numbers and it's clear that the tax takeaways in recent years, shown in green, are larger than the tax giveaways in red. And this next chart also helps cut through the confusion. The blue line shows projected tax receipts, still going to the highest share of GDP since the Second World War. Indeed, the share is heading higher than projected last October, as shown by the yellow line. But the big message to take away from this spring statement is that it might well be overtaken by events and the repercussions of war. Kirsty.
Ben, thank you. Well,